Boker Tov, Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, happy prep day. Welcome to the Aliyah day. Glad you're with me. I'm glad to be with you. I thought we would have some fun today and talk about a topic that I have actually never taught on or spoken about that is part of our Torah portion today. And that is the topic of Levirate marriage. Levirate marriage, where a brother marries the widow of his brother so that they can have children and perpetuate the name of his deceased brother. Now, this Levirate marriage was actually the storyline of a classic Hallmark movie called Loving Leah. Some of you probably have seen it. It's a good movie. It's a fun movie. It's, it's a romantic. Okay. What's fun about the movie is it's in a completely Jewish setting, and both of the main actors, the love interests, are Jews. One is secular, one is Orthodox. But overall, it's a good movie. It's interesting, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to see it, because as you're coming into Judaism, you probably recognize certain things that are in the movie where she koshers the oven and different things like that. But it's a good movie. But the premise of the movie is Levirate marriage. That's how in the movie Loving Leah, this couple ends up getting together under the auspices of Levirate marriage, which is really kind of an archaic custom. It was archaic even back in the 1st and 2nd century. We're going to explain why that's the case. But I thought it would be interesting to look at it because there are some halakhic peculiarities about it. Because you're actually, on the one hand, in Torah, forbidden from marrying your sister-in-law. Generally speaking, you can't marry your sister-in-law. So, under certain. So, in other words, if let's say you had a brother and he had a wife and they had children, your brother passed away. Now, the wife is the widow. You're, generally speaking, not allowed to marry her. This, of course, is an exception. And so it's interesting. We'll be looking at that, but I thought it would be fun, especially since it's the subject of the movie. So now that if you've seen the movie or you haven't seen it, either way, Now, after today's conversation, you can go back and rewatch the movie with maybe a little bit more halakhic understanding of what's going on, um, and so forth and so on. But before we get to that, let us say the shofar blessing and sound the shofar as Hashem is going to is leading us, I should say. The king is in the field and he's leading us to make teshuva, and we want to make teshuva. So here is the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. Bless you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to hear the voice of the shofar. Amen, amen, amen. Well, let's say Boker Tov to everybody this morning. Boker Tov, Chris and Crystal, good to see you this morning. Bonjour, Leslie. Bonjour, Kim. Buongiorno, Ahava. Guten Tag, Brenda. Guten Morgen, Donna. Boker Tov, Shoshana. Let's see. Bon dia to you, Elisheva. Bon dia, Hannah. Bonjour, Sergio. And Rebetzin, there she is. Good morning, Grace and Hepzibah. Guten Tag to you, Greg. Emmanuel. Guten Morgen to you there, Leah. Every time I say Guten Morgen, I think about being an Amish person. Good morning to you, Kathy. Good to see you. Good morning to, let's see, Mary Diaz and Miriam. Boker Tov to you. Good morning, Timothy. And Joshua, Guten Tag to you. Good morning, Gianna and Micaiah. And let's see, Deva, good morning to you. Glad you're here. Good morning, Zach and Yigal and Sarah Merritt. Hope you and Shane are doing great. Good morning, Alita and Heather Wilson. Hope you and Zachary are doing great. Good morning, Jacqueline Keys and Milka. There's Milka. Guten Tag to you, Milka. Guten Morgen, Anna. Buenos dias, Beard of Prey. Bonjour, Amana. Buongiorno to you there, Samuel. Good to see you, Sergio and Levi. And let's see, who else do we have? Good morning, Jean. Glad to see you this morning. Little Zara, she's about to have a birthday. I remember my first birthday. It was amazing. Good morning to you. Did I say good morning, Lisa? Who else do we have? All right, Baruch HaShem. Looks like that's everybody. So welcome aboard. Glad you're here. Let's look at the passage in the Torah that deals with this Levirate marriage. This comes from chapter 25, beginning in verse 5. And it says, when brothers dwell together, it's a key phrase there, halakhically. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no child, the wife of the deceased shall not marry outside to a strange man. Her brother-in-law shall come to her and take her to himself as a wife, or as we say in French, a wife, and perform Levirate marriage. It shall be that the firstborn, if she can bear, shall succeed the name of his dead brother, so that his name not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man will not wish to marry his sister-in-law, then his sister-in-law shall ascend to the gate, to the elders, and she shall say, my brother-in-law has refused to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He did not consent to perform the Levirate marriage with me. Then the elders of this city shall summon him and speak to him, and he shall stand and say, I do not wish to marry her. Then his sister-in-law shall approach him before the eyes of the elders. She shall remove his shoe from his foot and spit before him. And then she shall speak up and say, so is done to the man who will not build the house of his brother. Now, this is the cute part of the movie. This particular, if you've seen the movie or if you're going to watch the movie, what I just read is the turning point of the film, or not really the turning point, but this is the catalyst. This is what really creates the situation which became Loving Leah, was what I just read. I'm not going to say too much about the movie because I want you to, in case you haven't seen it, I want you to be able to see it. But what I just explained in this ceremony is what gets these two people into the predicament in which they find themselves. So it says in verse 10, then his name shall be proclaimed in Israel, the house of the one whose shoe was removed. That's if he doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law and therefore build up the house of his brother. Peculiar, isn't it? It's very interesting. It's a very interesting halacha, not practiced anymore. But let's read the Keho Tumash here, get a little bit deeper into the laws, and then we'll look at Bezrat Hashem Me'am Loez and get a little bit deeper than that. Boker Tov, I mean. So it says here, in the Keho Tumash, as you have been taught, you must not marry your brother-in-law or sister-in-law. There is, however, an exception to this law. If paternal or full brothers reside together, meaning that they're both alive at the same time, as opposed to if the second one had been born after the first one had died. So the first halakhic situation is that both brothers have to be living at the same time. That's what it means by reside together. Okay. So it can't be a woman who had a husband, he died, and then after the man died, then he had a brother who was born. That boy who's born is not obligated to marry the sister-in-law, and the sister-in-law is not obligated to wait on the boy to become man enough to marry her. Okay. So it says here, and one of them dies having no son, which would include a daughter or even a grandchild, either from his wife or from any other Jewish woman. So if the man has children from any Jewish woman, then the Levirate marriage is no longer applicable. Okay. He has to be completely childless, period. The dead man's wife will not thereby be automatically free to marry an outsider, that is, anyone other than her brother-in-law. Rather, ideally, her husband's brother must cohabit with her, thereby taking her as a wife for himself, thus marrying her in Levirate marriage. Now, it says here the primary duty to marry the dead man's wife devolves upon the eldest brother. This is not presuming that the man who passed away has multiple brothers. So whoever is the eldest of the brothers, this responsibility falls to him first. Okay. If the eldest brother prefers not to marry his widowed sister-in-law, then one of the other brothers should be approached to do so. The obligation for one of the brothers to marry the widowed sister-in-law only applies if she can bear children and if her deceased husband was capable of having children. So there's another halakhic issue. If she is barren, or if he was incapable of having kids, then the Levirate marriage is required. Okay, so it says the brother who marries her will succeed to his brother's estate in his deceased brother's name. By managing his brother's estate, his brother's name will not be obliterated from Israel, for that estate will always be remembered as the one that had belonged to his brother. Since the object of this law is that surviving brothers perpetuate the estate of the deceased brother, including whatever the inheritance from their common father, it applies, as stated above, only to paternal or full brothers, since only such brothers jointly inherit their father's estate and not brothers who are related only maternally. So this does not apply to stepbrothers. So they both have to have the same father and the same mother. They have to be full brothers, okay, in order for this to apply. If for some legitimate reason the man does not wish to take his late brother's wife as his own wife, and neither do any of the other brothers, the late brother's wife must go up to the gate, that is the court. That's because the gate is where the elders hung out, to the elders and the judges, and say to them, my husband's brother has refused to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He does not want to marry me. So notice that he has to have a valid reason. He can't, and there's plenty of valid reasons, but he cannot just say, no. He has to have a reason to say no. Okay, so and she says to them, my husband's brother has refused to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He does not want to marry me. Now the elders of his city must then summon him and speak to him, and he must stand up and say, I don't want to marry her and take her as a wife. His brother's wife must then approach him in view of the elders and remove his shoe from his foot. She must spit on the ground in front of him and respond to his refusal to marry her by saying, thus must be done to the man who will not build up his brother's household. The declaration of both the brother and the widow must be made in Hebrew. Okay. Now that part was not depicted in the movie, but probably for obvious reasons, because, they could have done it with captions, but I would have done it if I was a director, but then again, I'm a weirdo. The name of the brother performing the ceremony of release must then be called one time in the community of Israel as presented by those present in the community. This is the house of the one who had his shoe removed. So this is not a perpetual title. It's only for one time. It says they must all say in unison and in Hebrew, this is the one who had his shoe removed. Once the ceremony is completed, neither the brother who performed the ceremony nor any of his brothers may thereafter reconsider and marry the widowed sister-in-law, and she is permitted to marry outside the family. So once the ceremony is over, there's no going back. Now, let's look at another insight here from the Kale Chumash, which is very interesting. Okay. It says here, Levirate marriage. It is clear from these verses that ideally performing the Levirate marriage is preferable to avoiding it by the removal of the shoe ceremony, which is called chalitza. Chalitza. That, again, the movie, it talks about chalitza, it talks about Levirate marriage. It's really interesting. So it says, nonetheless, the Mishnah, now let's talk about the Mishnah. So we're going back to the 1st century time period, okay? The Mishnah, conscious of the decline in the spiritual stature, of the Jewish people in its day, already notes that formerly, when they performed Levirate marriage with the sole intention of fulfilling God's commandment, the rabbis held that Levirate marriage takes precedence over chalitza. Nowadays, when it may no longer be assumed that they will perform it with the sole intention of fulfilling God's commandment, chalitza takes precedence. Okay. So what it's saying here clearly that even in the days of the Mishnah, it was understood that people had lost their level of spirituality. And so it was preferred, because of that, it was preferred that people do the shoe ceremony, the chalitza, as opposed to Levirate marriage. Whereas before, it was better you should do the Levirate marriage and not do chalitza. But now, since you're not so spiritual, better to do the chalitza and not do Levirate marriage, because you're probably going to end up marrying her for the wrong reasons. So it says here, since marrying one's sister-in-law is otherwise forbidden, The concern was that if the brother-in-law would marry her with anything less than pure intentions, it might undermine the validity of the marriage, rendering any children born through it of doubtful legitimacy. Okay. So hence why pure intentions had to be the case here, because the marriage is otherwise forbidden except for this halakhic fact. So therefore, if you're not doing it in the right ideal, you could potentially be violating a Torah commandment. If you're not, in other words, if you're not doing it for the sake of the dead brother, then you're really violating a Torah prohibition. Now, this is an interesting comment after the fact, because what are the odds that a Jewish man, especially back in antiquity, if you think about it, in antiquity, what are the odds that a Jewish brother who's capable of marrying a woman, he's of age to marry a woman, is himself not already married? And that's what a lot of people may or may not think about with respect to this topic. Because the Torah and the sages assume that the brother that's supposed to perform the Levirate marriage is himself already married. So this is interesting because it would require him to take upon himself a second wife, which for some was part of the problem. Okay. It didn't want to. Taking a second wife was expensive. Women are expensive, right? Charlie says that's true. So it says here, in any case, once polygamy was abolished for the Ashkenazi communities by Rabbi Gershon ben Meir in the 11th century. So ever since the ever since the 11th century, like the 1000s, there's no longer been polygamy practiced in the Ashkenazi communities. Keyword Ashkenazi. Levirate marriage could only be practiced in these communities if the surviving brother was single. Okay. It goes on to say here, however, just as a footnote, that sometimes this did happen in certain circumstances up and until approximately the 12th century. In Sephardic communities, however, this custom has been practiced even until relevantly recent times. Okay. So the Sephardic communities are a little bit different with respect to that. Now let's look at the Ma'am Loez and some interesting comments here as well that he's going to make on this particular topic. So it says, this verses describe a mitzvah of kindness, yibun. Our sages taught a son brings merit to his father. So why is it so important for this to be going on? Because it's considered a kindness. It's a merit to the dead or deceased brother. The brother who marries, this is something else too, by the way, because this is why the sages talked about intentionality. The brother who marries this woman, the initial child that they have, boy or girl, is not to be reckoned as his, but rather as his brother's. Now that may not seemingly be such a big deal, maybe, but to a lot of people, a lot of men, it might be a big deal, particularly back in antiquity. Because you can imagine that, you marry a lady, she's your sister-in-law, and let's just say that she does have a child, boy, girl, whatever. It's not your child. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's your brother's child. That's how it's reckoned. For some people, that might be a little bit of an emotional, mental issue. I could see where that would be a problem. And so with that in mind, you could think that a man might say, I don't want to do that. Why? Well, because I don't think I could if we have a child, if that actually does happen, I don't want that child to be like not mine. Yeah, and look, for some people that may seem selfish, and maybe it is, probably is. But that's what it's talking about when it says this this act of levirate marriage is really a mitzvah of kindness, because a man has to kind of like give up his right to the child, so to speak. Okay. So it says, children's good deeds add to the reason it's a merit is because children's good deeds add to their parents' standing in the world to come. The Torah, therefore, allows a brother to perpetuate his name by marrying his wife and bearing children with her. Their first son is considered as the deceased child, as considered as the deceased's child, and endows him with the same spiritual benefit that your children bring to their natural parents. This comes from the halacha Sefer HaChinuk. Now, Leviticus 18:16 states, do not commit incest with your brother's wife. Yevamot 55a explains that this usually applies even after the brother's death, except for Yibun. Now, do not commit incest with your brother's wife, and his brother will cohabit with her, were pronounced simultaneously by God, according to Nedarim 3:2, which is in the Mishnah. Nevertheless, only Yibun supersedes the prohibition against sexual relations with a brother's wife. If the widow is forbidden to the deceased brother for other reasons, there is no obligation of Yibun. Thus, Yibun, of course, is referring to levirate marriage. Thus, if two brothers married two sisters, okay, and one brother died childless, the second brother may not marry the deceased widow. Leviticus 18:18, which forbids a man to marry two sisters. This overrides levirate marriage. So that's an interesting point too, halakhically. This happens sometimes, right? Where two guys end up marrying girls who are sisters. Okay. All right. Well, that does in fact happen. So you have a situation where, this happens and the man can't marry his sister-in-law because he can't be married to two sisters. So there's that. That's an interesting thought. So it says the brother-in-law who marries his dead brother's childless widow is called a yavam, and his intended a yevamah, until the yevamah either marries his yevamah or releases her through hazlicha. A yevamah may not marry an outsider or any other person. So, pause here for a minute, because a thought occurred to me. This is a very extraordinary circumstance. So, it's not every day that you have two brothers or four brothers or however many brothers, and one of the brother dies and leaves a wife who's childless. We're already dealing with a topic that is probably fairly rare. Okay. I'm talking about in ancient times, even today for that matter, but in ancient times. But the second thing I want to say was this is interesting because, so in the case where you have the woman who has the brother and he dies, everything's a full stop. So nobody can marry anybody until the Hatzlika ceremony is performed. Either the levirate marriage is performed or the Hatzlika ceremony is performed. So even if you're a brother and your brother dies and this, therefore this situation occurs, and you are potentially eligible to fulfill this mitzvah, you can't get married until you perform the Hatzlika. So that's very interesting. So Yevamot 92b explains that even if another man fulfilled the Kiddushin rites intending to wed a Yevamah, Torah law nullifies the action. Okay. Yevamun, levirate marriage only applies if the deceased has no surviving heirs. Now, if he leaves a daughter or even grandchildren from either a son or daughter, there is no mitzvah of yibun. So that's interesting as well. So if he has grandchildren, or a daughter or whatever, Now, this applies even if the son is illegitimate or not a natural son of the deceased widow. So that's why it said in the Kehil Tumash, of any other Jewish woman, okay, even illegitimately. All right. However, the widow of a man who has fathered children with a Gentile woman or a servant must undergo either yibun or halitza, excuse me, halitza. So, Gentile. So, I'm sorry. I was had two thoughts in my head at the same time. This is an interesting point to be made as well, because um, this is proof. Okay, this is proof halakhically that the Jewishness comes from the mother. Now, we also have proof in the book of Nehemiah as well, because in the book of Nehemiah, it's discovered that the men had taken a bunch of Gentile women and wed them, and this, of course, was a sin. And you know, Nehemiah and Ezra pray to God and basically ask God for forgiveness, but they tell the men who had taken Gentile wives to put away their wives and the children they had with them. Now, that's significant. Why? Well, because that indicates that children are not Jewish, which is the point. Okay. Now, I also want to make a mention about that particular story really quickly, because the women could have converted, and so could the children, which tells you something about the women. So imagine that you have all these men who've taken, Gentile wives, and then, they're rebuked for it and told to put away your wives. And so they're basically the men are like, okay, I can no longer be married with you, and you got to take little Johnny and little Susie and get up out of here. And the women just leave. Now they're single moms, and being a single mom in ancient times was not like us being a single mom today. So I mean, it's dangerous, very dangerous. It's life threatening, actually. So you got to ask yourself the question. I mean, why didn't they could have converted? They could have just said, "Well, I want to become Jewish." That's a very real possibility. Why didn't they? What does it say about the person who doesn't? And that, I mean, in that situation, what does it say about the person who doesn't even ask? I mean, yeah, in my opinion, I would have to suggest that perhaps it means that they really, really, really hated the God of Israel. They didn't want to be a part of the God of Israel. It kind of takes me back a little bit to what I was saying a few days ago about we have to really ask ourselves a question. If we're, the book that we study is a Jewish book. The God that we follow is a Jewish God. The Messiah that we follow is a Jewish Messiah. All of our heroes are Jews, every single one of them who practice Judaism. We believe that the resurrection of the dead will occur, and then we will all live in a Jewish city called Jerusalem. The holiest place on the planet, I think everybody would agree, is Israel. So why don't we want to be Jews? I'm just asking the question. See, it doesn't make logical sense if you say, well, so why don't we want to be Jewish? I mean, everything around us is Jewish. Everything we love and hold dear is Jewish. Now, I get it, by the way. I do understand to a degree that living a Jewish life, it comes with some challenges. They're not super hard, but it's more convenience of anything. And, and there's certain things that you might say, well, I really enjoyed doing this or eating that in the past, and I can't do that right now. And so that's kind of a bummer. I get that. I understand that. But still, when you come to the Word of God and you start studying the Word of God and you start reading, you're like, well, I mean, what else can I do? I mean, everything around me is Jewish. My God is Jewish. My Messiah is Jewish. My heroes are Jewish. My book is Jewish. My hometown is Jewish. everything is Jewish, and why am I not Jewish? It doesn't make sense. I'm just saying. So you have to ask yourself the question with respect to these women who were cast away with Nehemiah. Why didn't they want to become Jewish? What's the deal? You'd rather go take your kids and go out to who knows where? Yeah, because why? They don't want to follow the God of Israel. That's the why. That's the reason. That's what I can only assume that's the case because of the situation. Okay. So it goes on to say, so if the deceased wife is pregnant, her marital future depends on the outcome of that pregnancy. Okay, this is a nice, interesting halakha. If she miscarries, then you either have the Levirate marriage or the halitza. Okay, so that's interesting. I don't know about you. I find all these little halakhic nuances fun. But okay, so she's pregnant. Oh, you think, okay, well, she's pregnant. We don't need to do the Levirate marriage. Well, wait, we got to wait and see if she actually gives birth. God forbid she should have a miscarriage. That would be terrible. And if she does, then we are, we are in this situation. Now, according to Torah law, once she gives birth to a living child, there is no mitzvah of the Levirate marriage. However, the sages require her to undergo halitza if the baby dies, chas v'shalom, within 30 days of birth. Okay. A widow must wait 90 days after her husband's death before performing halitza. In this manner, it can be determined whether she is pregnant or not. Yevamot 44a. That's also brought out in the movie. This particular halacha is also brought out in the movie, which again is interesting. The oldest brother should fulfill the mitzvah of Levirate marriage. However, if he does not want to do so, another brother may perform this duty instead. Yevamot 24a derives this law from the use of firstborn son, bechor, in our verse. Although the term seems to refer to a son born of the Levirate union, our sages explain that it also refers to the deceased brother's oldest brother. Okay. The Jerusalem Talmud explains that Levirate marriage is not incumbent upon maternal brothers. As we said earlier, they have to have the same father. Now, from the narratives of Judah and Tamar in Genesis chapter 38, as well as Ruth and Boaz in Ruth chapter 4, it appears that in biblical times, Levirate marriage was practiced by relatives other than brothers. Nevertheless, there is no halakhic obligation to perform yibun in this fashion. Now, that's another interesting nuance. Boaz was not the brother of Ruth's deceased husband, and Judah was not obviously the brother of Tamar's deceased husbands. He was, in fact, their father. So that's interesting. The mitzvah of yibun only applies if brothers live together. That is, they have to have been alive at the same time. However, a difficulty may arise if the deceased brother is much older than he's much older. Neither yibun or hatzlicha can be performed until the yevama attains majority. Hence, if a yevama is very young when his brother dies, the latter's widow may have to wait many years before she is free to marry again. So this is assuming that let's say that, I don't know, let's say the brother who dies has a brother, but the brother who's alive at the same time is 10 years old. Well, he has to wait. They can't even do the halitza ceremony until he's at least a bar mitzvah. So she'd have to wait 3 years. It's interesting, right? So his brother will cohabitate with her implies that the marriage bond between a yevama and a yevam, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. Between a yevam, that's the brother, and a Yevamah, that's the woman, can only be established through sexual relations. Nevertheless, the sages instituted a ma'amer, establishing a bond resembling betrothal. Kiddushin 14:8. In other words, so the sages instituted kind of more of a standardized marriage. In other words, once you get engaged in Judaism, once you get engaged to a woman, she is considered she's like a wife. She's sanctified at that point. She's engaged to you. If, God forbid, she is unfaithful during that, before y'all get married officially, she's reckoned as having committed adultery at that point, even though y'all have not cohabitated. So that's the difference. Okay. So it says here, perpetuate the name does not necessarily mean that the child born of this union must be named after the deceased father. Our sages draw an analogy between the terminology employed by the Torah in this case and that used in the laws of inheritance. The phrase means that the Yevam will inherit his deceased brother's property. Ramban supports this concept, quoting the stories of Judah and Boaz, in which the newborn child was not named after the deceased. The Zohar, chapter 3, 281a, notes that Echad, one, is made up of the letters Et Dalet. Et means brother, and Dalet alludes to the wife. The union of the Yevamah and the Yevam, Slika, I keep messing that up, and the Yevamah is an expression of oneness, ultimately related to God's transcendent unity. End of our Aliyah today. Well, I hope that you found that discussion interesting and intriguing. Give us some more insight into the halacha surrounding Levirate marriage. Now you can go back and watch the movie Loving Leah with maybe some more knowledge of this mitzvah and bring some more intrigue to the story, perhaps maybe some more fun to the story. Todah Rabbah for being a part of the program today. It's been a joy to be with you. Please be sure and like this video, share it with all of your friends, and have a great Shabbat. If you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we're going to be having a community Shabbat tonight right here at the synagogue at 7 o'clock, and you are welcome to join us. We would like to have you with us, so don't miss out. God bless all of you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow in the synagogue. Until then, Shabbat Shalom. May today be a great day and a day of good news and good fortune for all of you.